Greetings and welcome to an earth-shattering, high-rise burning, world-drowning episode of Genre Grinder. With me today as returning guest, Mr. Justin Clark. Mr. Clark, could you remind the people who you are?
Yes, I am a freelance writer for Slant Magazine, GameSpot, and coincidentally am the one scientist with the knowledge required to save the world.
And people might remember we covered video game movies and what was the other? Afrofuturism and black sci-fi are the two we've done in the past. Today we're not going quite as esoteric. We're going for a big mainstream subject, disaster movies. And not movies that are a disaster in terms of quality or production, but movies that are about disastrous events. And I'm personally a big fan of these, probably contrary to what most of my movie taste is, but there's something about how cliche-ridden this subgenre is that I really like about it. It's kind of comforting. And as far as I could tell, the first disaster movie that we know of that survived is an Italian silent film about the last days of Pompeii from 1913. And then you get that one remade a couple times, and then that takes us up to there's an earthquake film called Deluge from 1933 that was a big studio Hollywood movie. And then there was another attempt to revival in the 50s with When the Worlds Collide and The War of the Worlds, which were both part of this sort of 50s sci-fi thing. So that's like another section of disaster movies that we're not going to really go into today. Well, we're going to go into some sci-fi stuff, but we're mostly pretending that we're sticking to natural disasters here, which sort of had its renaissance in the 1970s. So usually I start things, we will do things in a chronological order, but this time I'm just going to flip it a little bit because I'd like to start with first movie we watched was The Towering Inferno. Which is actually the second in release order, but I'll get to that later. The Towering Inferno was not the first of its kind. It was following the lead of this 1970 film Airport and the Poseidon Adventure, which were ensemble casts, big budgets, and they were huge hits. So then we had this short run of really expensive, effects-laden, super bloated ensemble cast disaster movies in Hollywood. And this was one I hadn't seen in a long time, so I just thought it would be a fun one to cover from that standpoint.
And this was always one of those movies that, like, it was always on cable, it was always on some channel growing up. Yeah. I always saw bits and pieces of it, always went, wow, I should probably watch that movie, and never did. So this was the... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you probably caught like bits and moments of it flipping through channels like I used to.
Yeah, and it wasn't until this time where I actually sat down, some 38 years later or whatever it is, to actually watch it from beginning to end. First of all, not realizing it's almost 3 hours long. That was an afternoon. I did not expect to go the way it did.
Yeah, and I mean, when I say bloated, and that's why this one might actually be the best example of this. Earthquake was released around the same time, as also really long, but I think this is the longest of these 70s ones. I'll just give a little background. The story goes that Warner Brothers had the rights to Richard Martin Stern's book, The Tower, at almost the exact same time that Fox had the rights to a Thomas N. Scortia and Frank N. Robinson book called The Glass Inferno. So producer Irwin Allen convinced both studios to combine resources so the two projects wouldn't cannibalize each other. And so it's kind of an adaptation of two books with characters taken from each, but the screenplay was then written by the Poseidon Adventure scribe Sterling Silliphant. So it's ultimately a Sterling Silliphant joint. Even the director, John Guillermin, was not much of a name. It wasn't like he was known for his vision. He was hot off Shaft in Africa. And then this was
he has street cred just based on that.
Right. So. Right. Unfortunately, I was hoping if you look back further, he would have done like all the Shafts. That would have been especially cool. But But he was just sort of workhorse guy, and then after this was a hit, he got hired to make the King Kong remake, which then was a huge flop, and he kind of disappeared again.
Here's one question I had just before you move on with that.
Yeah.
But like, is this the only time that, like, you know, one studio has the rights to one book, someone has the rights to a completely separate book with the same idea, and just made an adaptation of both all at once? Because I read that and I was just like, I don't think I've ever heard that happening ever.
As far as I know, this is the only time that's happened. I think there have been cases where a book is similar enough to a screenplay that's already been written that the studio buys the rights to the book so that nobody sues.
Yeah, but I'm, you know, kind of skipping ahead, but like there's that whole thing in the 90s where just like, you know, two movies with the same premise coming out, you know, very close to each other. And I guess in the 90s they were just like, well, screw it, let's just let it rock and find out what happens. But yeah, like it's very weird that like you were like, hey, we got the same idea, why not just make a weird little hybrid?
Yeah, and it's funny. I guess we could skip ahead a little bit to just the fact that a lot of those movies were disaster movies. We had 2 asteroid movies, 2 crash land on Mars movies, 2 volcano movies,
2 tornado. Wait, was there another tornado movie? I don't think there was.
I can't recall. 2 ant related animated movies.
Yes.
Yeah,
well, I mean, one had Kevin Spacey in it, one had Woody Allen in it, so I think they had more in common than they realized.
Yeah. Well, in that case, and in some cases, it was just, you know, they happened to have 2 projects at once. I think in this case of Ants and Bugs, it was genuinely them trying to get ants out first to show up old Disney people. But, you know, we're not talking about bug movies, I suppose.
Right. Well, yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that there have been disaster movies either, just because, I mean, it's such a simple, like, you know what the audience is there for. Like, nobody's coming here to see, like, this particular character from this particular book do this particular thing.
Right. Which is why it's so weird that they were so obsessed at putting big movie stars in these, especially people like Paul Newman, and this one has Paul Newman and goddamn, I'm sick
Steve
picturing
McQueen.
Yes, thank you, Steve McQueen, who didn't like doing movies like this. They had, you know, and then they fought over who was highest listed on the poster, and it was actually a problem. It became a problem with the whole production with having all these stars, and I imagine it must have happened on other movies too. William Holden was another one who wanted his name on the poster above everybody else's. And a lot of the times these people barely even interact, especially in this movie where you've really got people cordoned off, which I was thinking, well, I should say this is not a very good movie. I think I'm safe saying that it's not great and it hasn't aged very well. And that we're really talking about because it's an ideal like example of what to expect from this period of horror movies. Especially like the fact that they get these big actors and then they just make them perform with the most heavy-handed performances you can imagine. It's like which is something that you see in later disaster movies where you'll have these big sweeping expensive crane shots of people who are basically acting on a primetime soap opera for any sort of human level interaction. And you can tell that they're sort of throwing out, so they make sure that they're getting everybody who they signed up is getting their scene. There'll be little vignettes that don't really matter. This is a really good case of how you can just lose control of a story so simple as a building is burning and people need to get out of it. You can blow that up into a 3-hour-long movie.
Right. Yeah, I think they pull it together more by the end. Like by the third act, I'm like, okay, like everybody is screwed over. Let's just try and get everybody out of this building. And they kind of put all the drama with Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire is in this movie. Why? Just I don't understand.
And then he was nominated for the Oscar for best. Actually, he won for best supporting actor for that little.
Oh my god! I didn't realize he won.
Yeah, and it was one of those, you know.
Probably like you know, whole career awards, just like, hey, you're in a new thing, let's just give you an Oscar.
I should say he won the Golden Globe. He was nominated for the Oscar. My bad.
Okay, that's
I mean, he is
slightly
good
better.
in it, but he's very unnecessary. And honestly, if you didn't read the synopsis, it feels like a lot of his scenes were deleted because you don't really know why he's there. He's trying to he's some sort of con man, but they never really explain what that entails.
Yeah,
And
and his story is really done by like a third of the way in. Where like he goes to his woman's room and he's like, "So you still like me even though I'm a con man?" And she's like, "Sure, baby, I'm fine with that."
and then
And
yeah, he's just a guy in the background until the very end.
right, and well, I think that's the whole thing with just these disaster movies in general is that they want to make a movie that is all destruction and mayhem, but it's at war with the idea that you need some sort of human element in order to make everything stick, which is a nice element on paper, but we also know that's not why people come to these movies.
In this case, there's some really easy bits to have just cut out. And unfortunately, the
Yeah.
easiest parts to edit out are the Robert Wagner, Susan Flannery kind of side quest thing that goes on, which is unfortunate because it has the most spectacular violence in the entire movie.
Yes.
Which so they're like having an affair and then things go wrong and they set it up as if Wagner's going to get out and get her help, but Wagner just burns to death.
Right. Like
You're like, oh, I guess
I ran the
she'll
100-yard dash and then poof.
and it's like it's like oh no he's dead, okay. And then she you think like okay she'll figure out a way out. No, she falls out the window.
Yeah,
um
what it reminded me of, and this is completely random, but the first thing that came to my mind was that Bitten Old, where just like you have that one guy who's just like, "Don't worry, I used to swim in high school," and like 20 minutes later, his skeleton washes up.
right. I guess Old does have the structure of a disaster movie, even though it's much smaller scale. It is
Yeah, it's
so
just the idea of
insane.
just like there's this unstoppable force that we need to craft a human drama around for
Right.
some reason. Well, there's more of it in Old just because you can. It is smaller scale, but for this, I mean, like the whole appeal is it's big and it's going to blow up. Is the appeal, and they keep they keep putting the Love Boat into this movie, and I
It
don't know
really,
why.
yeah, and the Love Boat, that's a really good yeah, it feels exactly like that brand of like early evening television drama. It's not even like the really exciting Dallas and shit like that where it's just really over the top and raw. It really feels like the
It's
inconsequential.
very nice and pleasant, and just like people in the 70s going like, we're having sex, but like we can't actually talk about that, so we're going to have weird
Yeah.
flirty energy going on. I don't know how to describe it.
And I mean, I'm sure that part of this is because it was based on a book and there's good scenes in the book that they wanted to put in. Uh, but it was based on two books, I suppose.
Right.
That might be part of the problem too.
And more than anything else, I mean, it really makes me respect Steven Spielberg for going like, yeah, so all that dramatic shit that was in the book, yep, screw that. It's gone. It's gone. We
Yeah.
don't need to know about Hooper's dealings with the mob. It's gone.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, in a way, Jaws is also sort of a disaster movie. A lot of those nature run amok or eco horror movies are disaster movies too. But Jaws is just what it's just like such a perfect case of adapting the material. I don't imagine either of these books were particularly fantastic. They were like the kind of thing you'd read at the get at the airport and read on the plane, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think like it's not an accident. Like the one bit of trivia I did see for this before we came on to record was the fact that like Roderick Thorpe apparently had like either had a dream about this or saw this and immediately started writing the book that Die Hard is based on, which
Yeah.
also is not a great book. And then a better director came along and did something amazing with it.
Yeah. Yeah. You just keep kind of consolidating it. There are some fun surprises in the cast. Well, yeah, so it's a good idea with the cast because they're taking aging new Hollywood guys, McQueen, Newman, kind of William Holden, Faye Dunaway, who has nothing to do in this
Oh
movie.
yeah,
And then you get your TV stars, Richard Chamberlain, Robert Wagner, Dabney Coleman. And then you get your one really old school star, Fred Astaire. Like this is something that is absolutely going to become a thing you do in the 90s is you try to get guys who are getting up there in age, who have never done something like this, some old people, and then like young TV stars who you're hoping to build a better career for. But then in this one, you also got Felton Perry, who is the OCP stooge in all 3 original RoboCop movies.
Yeah.
And he's good. He's a firefighter. He's got I wouldn't say charisma as much as
presence,
and he's a good soothing element, because that's one thing I will say, the firefighters in this are like, they're not bros. They're really trying to help people. They're very helpful, good. Even the Steve McQueen character isn't that much. He's like doing suicidal missions, but he's not acting like a badass. He's very understated. And
what I really like about the movie, as a matter of fact, is the fact that it's the one thread that really does work is this whole idea of, they undercut everybody so they could cut corners with the building. Everybody who's responsible for building this building is pissed off about it, and when everything starts going down, like, they are immediately in business mode. They're just trying to get out, save lives, save this building if they can, but everyone else can go screw. Like Richard Chamberlain, who has go ahead.
Yeah, no, Chamberlain is maybe the star of the movie, because he knows exactly what he is, such a sleazebag. And I think a lot of the other characters, like the William Holden character, you're supposed to say, oh, they failed and they're going to make things better. Whereas
Richard Chamberlain wants nothing good for anyone ever.
And again, I had seen this years and years ago, so I didn't really remember very much about it. But as soon as they set up a little pulley, a 1 person at a time pulley system to take people from one tower to another, that the second they do that, you're like, oh, Chamberlain's going to fuck this up somehow. And
sure immediately enough, when that happened, like, I was just like, oh yeah, somebody's going to beat a Billy Zane here, and I think I know who it is.
I mean, it is kind of funny how inept everybody is. It seems like I think the thing that works in disaster movies is when it is an unavoidable disaster, something like natural, like a weather system or something, and the people who fail are failing to acknowledge how bad the situation is. Whereas this is a situation where the disaster happens because everybody is cutting corners, and then people we're supposed to like Paul Newman, but he also has no idea what's going on. He knows every in and out of this building, but doesn't notice how bad the wiring is. And
he was just like, look, I just drew the thing and walked away, cashed my paycheck. I'm just like, you know what? Game recognized game. I understand that in 2022, but in 1976, you should have been doing your job. What the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess he has a lot of responsibilities for an architect. He's kind of...
From what I can tell, his responsibilities mostly have to do with canceling his calls and screwing Faye Dunaway. That is his job.
I mean, well, there's also another surprise in this. This is O.J. Simpson's first big movie performance. Not that was just like a cameo or a small movie. This was supposed to be O.J. Simpson's coming out, and he did sort of have a career after this. He just was never a great performer.
Well, even here, again, they put him in business mode, and he's fine. Nothing right. Mind-blowing or anything. But, again, he does have presence. He does his job admirably. And, he just kind of disappears among the rest of the firefighters, really.
Well, and he's like the... he's not a firefighter. He's like the... He's
building maintenance kind of deal.
Yeah,
he's like a first line of defense.
You can't tell how much he's in charge of, but he does boss some people around. But there is they sort of set up a subplot where he goes and rescues Fred Astaire's girlfriend's cat.
Yeah.
And I actually would have liked to see that movie, putting aside who O.J. Simpson is. I would have liked to see the movie about this guy who rescues the cat and this sort of hijinks he got into to get down, because they're not really good at establishing the geography of this building and why.
No, it's just there's up and there's down, and in between is just this weird labyrinth of liminal space. Who knows?
And some people get out, some can't. It doesn't really.
Yeah. That does bring up my favorite cliche that comes up in just multiples of these movies, especially as time goes on, which is, no matter what happens, if you introduce an animal, that animal better live.
Yes.
Or else. Arguably, the animals in disaster movies are more the star than the stars of the movie. As long as that cat is there, that dog is there and it survives something horrible, we are on its side. We are with that film until the very end,
I,
always.
I still remember seeing Independence Day in the theater as like a tween or I guess I was a teenager at the time, and people literally cheering for the dog.
Oh yeah, like this is Will Smith's big star-making vehicle, and nothing in that movie created more of an applause than Boomer surviving
The
Independence Day.
dog lived. Yeah. Which is really in a lot of ways, and we're not even going to talk about that movie very much, but the funny thing about that scene is that is to me, as someone who doesn't love Independence Day, that's kind of the end of the movie. That's the climax of the entire film, because then the next hour and a half isn't nearly as exciting as that lead up. And so the fact that the dog survives the explosion literally ends the destruction sequences, which are the best,
Yeah,
is always like you can just turn off the movie there and a lot, depending on who
and I'm
you are.
someone who loves that movie, watches it every year, but agreed, like just the build up to that, and that's your climax.
The
They
dog
knew what they
lived.
were doing. Yeah. And we're going to get into it when we get to like 2012 and all of
Yeah.
that, but just Emmerich knows exactly what the people came to see.
And I mean, these movies definitely inspired Emmerich to the
Oh, 1000%. Like the structure, the way he deals with characters, the way he builds the characters up just to put them in horrible situations. The whole nine is just the Roland Emmerich playbook from beginning to end.
I should say okay, so I'll say some nice things about it. One thing that works is that unlike what I was just saying about Independence Day, where and the original Poseidon Adventure, I feel they both run out of steam after the initial disaster occurs. This one is a case where it's just gonna keep getting worse throughout the movie. So
Yes.
there is at least the implication of a ticking clock. They kind of lose it by having all these subplots and scenes where people argue with each other, and there's no fire around them while they're arguing. They sort of lose that momentum, but it's I structurally it's a good idea. And I like the parts where Paul Newman helps rescue Jennifer Jones and the Brady Bunch children. Uh, in a weird way, the tower part of the equation is a lot scarier than the Inferno part. There's other than Wagner's death, there's not a lot of super terrifying fire stunts.
Well, what happens is like there's a lot of stunts of just people falling off this tower or through
Yeah.
elevator shafts, and once you add in the fact that like oh they're also on fire, it's just oh
Yeah.
damn.
Yeah. Well, I should also say that Christine, until recently, worked answering alarm systems. So she was watching it with me and kept on referring to me about the various jargon they were saying for the emergency situations.
Was
It
it
was
accurate?
so I guess it was accurate. Yeah, or at
Oh,
least
nice.
it's considering how old the movie is. It's like it kind of part of me was a little like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. We haven't improved things too much since then.
Oh,
Though,
that's not surprising whatsoever. I've learned things about how analog nuclear launch procedure
yeah.
still is, and yeah, the fact that like our emergency services haven't really improved is not a surprise anymore.
There is, I should say, one thing that the real world since then interceding here is that there's a conversation where the McQueen character is said we need to get the National Guard. I should say the National Guard officer, who I can't remember his name now, says to McQueen that we can get people up the stairs, and McQueen says it's too hard to walk up 79 floors with all that equipment on. And knowing what we know now, that was actually one of the big problems with 9/11, but that they did walk up
Oof.
however many floors with all that equipment on. So knowing in an actual crisis situation where a huge building is collapsing, uh, be it 22 years ago or whatever it is, they did firefighters would have to do this. And so the movie trying to be realistic was actually unrealistic. I'm sure that screenwriters said, yeah, there's no way they're walking all the way up those stairs. That would be ridiculous.
Right.
I won't believe it.
Well, the
But
part that really screwed me up in general was just that ending and like the last bit of Steve McQueen and Paul Newman looking at each other like, "Hey, so maybe next time consult me the next time you want to build a
Mhm.
giant tower on how to make this not happen again." He's like, "Hey, you got it." Makes me realize like the World Trade Center was built, I think, 2 years after this, 76.
Yeah, probably pretty darn close, because the King Kong movie that the director made
Yeah,
after,
that goes up to the World Trade Center,
and it was a big deal. Yep.
And just the fact that it had all these same problems in this movie, but a lot worse, was really just breathtaking and horrifying to realize after the movie ended.
And it wasn't like this was some obscure film. This was a massive hit, one of the biggest hits of the year. And it was nominated for Best Picture against Godfather 2, The Conversation, Lenny, and Chinatown. Which,
yeah, the second
really,
I realized what year this was nominated, it's
like,
just.
I mean, think about. I mean, it was nuts to think. I'm sure that we'll look back on plenty of things in our lifetime that were like, oh my god. Like, if I looked at a list, I would see there'd be like some real sore thumb in a really great year.
Avatar. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Well, I was thinking about like 1999, but in that case, most of the greatest films weren't even nominated, so that was kind of the joke. So that's usually the problem, is you'll have a year where you'll have really great. I wonder what was the year that, like, No Country for Old Men, 2007, and There Will Be Blood. That seemed like a really good year for movies. I wonder if there was an absolute joke in that lineup.
Let's find out with our Google machine. And yeah, so No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, Juno, Michael Clayton, and Atonement.
I feel like Juno, Michael Clayton, and Atonement both don't have a lot of staying power, but they're not like, it's not like they threw in.
It's like, not a joke pick. I can see why they nominated both.
Yeah, like there was some point there that this is a movie has not aged well, and it's kind of funny that it was nominated for as many things as it had, and it's actually not even as important as we're making it sound, because again, there had already been Poseidon Adventure and Airport, and then there was like 2 Airport sequels. I think Airport 75 came out this same year, and like I said, Earthquake, which I would have to watch again, but I remember being the better movie of the two. It at least has more going on, because the entire city of LA is crumbling instead of just one building.
It also impressed me that just they have a John Williams score in both those movies, as a matter of fact, and this one is just like realizing John Williams scored it after the fact, just because his score disappears, kind of.
Yeah, I suspect it was probably like an 8-hour long assembly cut somewhere. Because especially because you have Fox and Warner Brothers agreeing to do something, you know that didn't go well. You know that they were arguing about every little thing. So,
yeah, like they have for God knows how long.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So you take whatever Roger Rabbit discussions between Warner Brothers and Disney, and you just multiply them, because the whole movie is that kind of thing. But what I want to do is then go back in time a couple years to another country. I just wanted to establish that the 70s were a big time for this.
Well, even before we do that, I will say, just on the plus side for Towering Inferno, which, it's kind of across the board, because they know what the people came to see. The fire stunts in this movie are pretty spectacular, even to this day.
Yes, that's true. And the fire, well, I believe they turned it into a ride at Universal Studios. I believe.
Wow.
So the technology behind the fire itself was also really impressive for the time. It's just we're so used to CG fire actually looking pretty good these days that fire stunts, I don't think, have the same impact to audiences now.
Yeah, but I don't think you could release this now and have people look at it, with the same amount of awe that you did back in the 70s. But just looking at it with modern eyes, in terms of that's real fire there that they probably had to run through, and there's a lot of people on fire. Like, I remember a couple years ago when there was that big deal with Game of Thrones, because they had the person who, and there's no good way to phrase this, but person who had been on fire for the longest for a movie had happened during Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And here's this movie where it's like, oh yeah, like 90% of this movie is on fire. And we did that. And it's real. And yeah, and again, it shows on screen and looks really fantastic. It looks really scary. It's just
having the gas valves to make the fire,
right,
and make sure it doesn't burn down the entire set is alone a really magnificent feat that I just don't think my brain in particular is wired to recall that anymore. Because again, special effects are much safer these days, which is a great thing. I'm not not going to say this is a back in my day things were better kind of situation, but like it does switch your mind to know that special effects are safe, knowing like you forget how fucking dangerous it could have been. Where like car crashes look really bad these days, I guess we can still have car stunts that look brutal.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like the big argument today, as a matter of fact, is just about that bear in Prey in terms of, yes, it doesn't look great, but you know what probably does look even better? Amber Mid-Thunder not being mauled by an actual bear.
Or
So, I
some
mean,
poor miserable bear, you know, either
right,
way,
yeah,
it
that
wouldn't be great
too.
for anybody. But yeah, I think most people agree Fire looks pretty good these days in
Yeah,
movies.
absolutely.
They kind of got that one. There was some bleak times there in my teenhood where early digital effect Fire looked particularly bad. So anyway, yeah, so we'll go back in time just a couple of years, and we're gonna go to Japan for Japan Sinks, or the Submersion of Japan, or the Sinking of Japan. There are multiple titles. We're going to call it Japan Sinks because it's the briefest one. And so, but I wanted to set up. I wanted to set up that 70s thing first. And so, since we didn't do Poseidon Adventure, I thought we would just flip back in time here for just a second. Because I did not. The reason I wanted to cover this movie is because I'm really aware of a lot of Japanese cinema from the 60s and 70s, but it's almost all underground or exploitation. And you know, as far as the really popular stuff, like I know some Godzilla movies, which are disaster movies in their own right, but I'm really unfamiliar with what was mega popular at the time. And this book and movie are among the most popular uh, things, media empires in Japan, and they're just things that I don't think the only reason that people might in America might have heard of it is that they've recently had an animated version, an anime version on Netflix. That's like the only way I can see people just happening upon this very popular.
Yeah, and I remember seeing just the anime being one hugely popular, but the rare thing where like the anime thing is not only popular but legitimately good.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard, and I did not watch it, but yeah.
Yeah, again with Netflix anime, I mean, like it's a crapshoot regardless. Most of it is going to be like very kiddie, but this was one of the ones where like, no, there's some weight behind it. Go watch it. And everyone I've talked to said like, they were in tears by the end. It's just harrowing from beginning to end. Like Grave of the Fireflies comes up a lot in reference to it. I mean, it's a big deal. So I do have, excuse me, I do eventually have to check this out.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to check out. The book was called, and I'm gonna butcher this because like I butcher it, Nihon Chinbotsu. Uh,
Oh no,
this
that's it. Yep. Trust the
um
person who has 300 hours in Duolingo. Yeah, that's
okay,
it.
yeah. So there we can talk about the franchise for a second here. It was drastically re-edited in the US for a version called Tidal Wave, produced by Roger Corman.
Mm.
It was a television series broadcast that aired between 1974 and 75 because the movie was such a hit. They're like, well, let's turn this into a TV show. Then in 2006, there was a big budget remake that was a huge phenomenon all on its own, that then released a parody movie, a pretty low budget parody movie called The World Sinks Except Japan, which funnily enough is the only one of these I had ever seen. It was one of those random discs that got mailed to me to review back in the DVD active days, so I watched it. And then there was a 2021 television series called Japan Sinks: The People's Hope, and then in 2020, or I guess 2020, we have the series that's currently on Netflix. So it's one of those things that actually got bigger, which I think you can compare that to Godzilla, because Godzilla was, I mean, Godzilla never went away. I guess this one had a pretty long divide there, but it's similar on that, and they both have Netflix cartoons
But what
made
struck
in Japan.
me with it was just like Godzilla. It's one of those things where like every generation that gets their hands on it kind of puts their own like
Mhm.
bias on it from what the little I know about like Japan's political situation during all these periods, and then just reading about what was their take on, okay, Japan is facing a natural disaster, now what? And
yeah, I mean, a lot of these movies have an environmental message. Towering Inferno doesn't really. It's, if it has any theme, it's at the theme of corporate
build
oversight.
better buildings, and
Yeah.
that's
And I don't think we need to delve in too deeply into why Japan would have such a taste for disaster movies, but in case there's someone listening who just hadn't bothered to consider it because it's not the most important thing in the world, Japan has a long, scary history of really big, devastating earthquakes and tidal waves. And then there's also the matter of it being the only country that was atomic bombed during any sort of war. So these events keep disasters and major destruction in the public consciousness a lot, the same way that 70s American horror movies are all about rural versus urban, and scare stuff and uh drug wars and stuff like that. In Japan they have enough shit going on with just the fact that their country is shaking all the time
but
that can be a major part of their
the main thing that always strikes me is, even after all this stuff happens, and again, we saw this in America after 9/11 as well, is once we start making art about it and start having to actually entertain people, the stuff we run to is stuff that directly reminds us of the horrible thing that happened, and trying to, I guess, face up to it in some weird way. And I've been thinking about this ever since Nope came out, which is kind of about the same thing, just trying to recontextualize trauma in a way where we can, carry it and actually deal with it instead of having to directly confront the thing, staring right in its face.
Mhm.
And the thing that keeps happening with us, which is oddly not as reflective in our disaster movies, is horrible thing happens and we get the lesson from it, but also don't choose to learn anything from it.
Right.
Japan, on the other hand, is constantly trying to go, remember this for future reference. And the people get it and their politicians don't, is what I'm gathering from it.
I mean, yeah, you just have to look at Shin Godzilla being such a massive hit when it's,
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
movie about bureaucracy, and it had, it became a movie about Fukushima, if I'm remembering the name right. It was the Fukushima earthquake, or
Yes.
Fukushima,
Yeah, tsunami, like all this stuff, really.
and that was pretty new and pretty raw, and people like, I don't I American cinema really pretended 9/11 didn't happen for a couple years, and then when it did, it was really roundabout. And there was even times, I mean, even when Superman came out, or not Superman, sorry, Man of Steel came out, which was many years later, there was still and I was guilty of this too, a sort of backlash against large scale destruction because we had seen it on the news. You can't blow up buildings anymore in movies, it's not cool.
Which was so ironic, just because, again, I lived in Jersey right across, like close enough to 9/11, where for weeks afterward, we were smelling burnt plaster in the air.
Mhm.
Like we were that close. And anytime you went to a Blockbuster or anything like that afterward, for months on end, like the highest, the most popular movies were always Akira, Armageddon, Deep Impact. Like we wanted to be able to look at this and try to make sense of what we had just witnessed.
Yeah.
And the fact that just, Hollywood kept trying to make that decision for us was just a very weird clash, I guess.
Yeah, it was the time, because now that would, where we're at now, that the movies, especially horror movies, are willing to go straight into that.
Right.
Though, back to Japan Sinks, I would not consider this a horror movie at all.
No.
It's both value and strength and weakness is that it's dry. It has some of those sort of blue collar. The main character, Hiroshi, who played by Hiroshi Fujioka. Um, his name is Toshio. Toshio is a blue collar worker, so we get some of the story from his point of view. And later in the film, after the events have gone on long enough, he then again becomes a hero. But there's a big, long part in the middle of the movie where he's totally lost. in and it's basically government officials arguing about what to do. I get, well, this sort of ties into Shin Godzilla, which is they like, apparently that still sells in Japan, is watching government officials argue about this kind of, it's in Akira too, now that I think about it.
Yeah, there's
some,
this whole idea of just their government will argue about everything till they're blue in the face and not actually doing anything. And Shin Godzilla was the first time. I think part of the appeal from what I've read about it is the fact that the end result of that film is like, screw it, we're going to do it like the Americans do and just actually just take some sort of action instead of sitting here waiting to get lasered.
Yeah, that was a case where I saw that movie and I saw it as this really movingly depressing movie, and then I found out that it was actually considered really cathartic and life affirming in Japan, and so I had to realize that I was reading it from my political point of view. And so it was like, yeah, after all, but no, to them that's exactly what it was. And in this case, they do sort of, other countries are part of the problem. The idea is that something has occurred in the tectonic plates where Japan is going to have a series of earthquakes and literally just sink into the ocean. And they do have a lot of time. There's a point in the movie where like, oh no, we thought we had 2 years and we only have like 10 months, which is still quite a bit of time in disaster movie time.
But not nearly enough considering how long it would take them to actually negotiate what they're going to do.
Right. So a sizable amount of the movie is about trying to find places to put people in other countries. And for some reason they decided Australia is the villain. I don't know why. But like most countries are like, yeah, we'll take this many people. And there's a whole scene where they go to Australia to ask if we can we please have some refugees here. And the Australian prime minister is like, no, fuck you guys. You're going to ruin our whole country with all of your Japanese-ness. And it's like, well, what did Australia do? Why are they? Were they just an easy target because they're probably less like? Is Australia a stand-in for America here? Is this like, I don't get it. But
yeah, one of the things I didn't get to Google before I came on that I wanted to was just like what the Australian-Japan relationship was like, especially like during World War II. Like, did they have like refugees in Australia? Was just like, no, get the fuck out of here or something? Like,
I don't know. It was a little weird to me. But Australia's the. I mean, we get to see a montage of other countries accepting people, and we get to see a lot of stuff in the UN and arguments and stuff. But Australia is the one country who gets 2 solid scenes of saying, no, we're not going to take anybody. That's actually the point of the world sinks except Japan, is that everything else is sinking, and all these other countries are trying to put refugees into Japan, and Japan's not letting them in and being really nationalistic about the whole thing. And so everybody's like really strong stereotypes of their culture. So the Americans are really boorish assholes who like think they deserve to be in Japan. I don't remember it being that funny, but the concept being really funny.
yeah.
And so you do have the thing, you do have the thing where the higher up government types are ignoring the problem, which is something that's going to happen in a lot of the Roland Emmerich stuff we're going to talk about soon. That's always a problem. And but what's interesting here is that the evil prime minister is downplaying the situation to avoid panic, which I guess is like the mayor in Jaws, because he's corrupt and greedy. But then he actually sort of becomes a hero after that. It's like he pulls his shit together and figures out what he's doing. And instead of getting the Richard Chamberlain falling out of the building treatment, he like gets a chance to redeem himself, which is interesting. I think that other than the Australians, there's no bad guys in this movie.
There's just like this whole collectivist like failure of everyone going on. Like, what really reminded me of was, and this was one of my one and done movies, but Threads. In terms of just, we know what's about to happen and we're just watching the complete collapse of anyone's ability to do anything about it, and just very dryly showing what's happening while all this is going on.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the earliest episodes of Genre Grinder. We covered those nuclear scare movies that are just, there's nothing you can do about it. And they were made to make people have despair. They were made to make people that the day after and testament. They were made to make people despair and call their local politician and say, you gotta not drop nukes.
Right. And so along with this, so again, me being a reviewer, there's a game I just reviewed called South of the Circle, which is just like this tiny little indie game. It's mostly walking, making dialogue decisions and whatnot. But they had something in there that I did not know actually happened back in the 60s, which was they were testing nuclear armament in Antarctica. It's not even, yeah, it was England, Norway, and Russia all testing stuff and trying to lie to the other about the fact that they're testing stuff in Antarctica. And the fact that, so the town where like all this takes place is in England, and there's all these just riots and all these movies coming out, all this art coming out saying that, hey, we have nukes as well. We do not want them. We don't want to start anything from the ground floor. And their politicians saying, no, it's a Cold War. We need to in order to maintain our place in all this. And I thought about that a lot watching this because I was playing it roughly at the same time I actually ended up getting into this because, again, this was about 2.5 hours long. So I was like, okay, I got to break this into a couple nights. But Anna, there's this very heavy, like 70s kind of like we have to fix the world vibe with all the art that comes out at this time from multiple countries. And something happens just later in the 70s. I guess it's the blockbuster effect of like, you know, Spielberg, Star Wars, all that, where it has to, you know, kind of be dumbed down a little for the popular consumption, where a lot of the disaster stuff seems to have this point of we need to make the world safer so none of this actually happens. And it kind of transitions later into these things happened. Oh, well, let's enjoy the ride. I don't know how or when that shift officially happens, but the shift is definitely there, going from this to like, you know, Dante's Peak or something like that.
Right. And it makes sense politically that the 70s were enough time after World War II and after hippie, you know, that sort of hippie movements, those counterculture movements got some steam. Some movies would want to deal with those kinds of filmmakers and ideas. And then by Reagan's era, you just want to have fun again. And you also don't want to establish the fact that maybe the superpowers are the bad guys.
Right.
You know, it's just us versus them kind of situations again. Whereas these movies are, you know, somebody fucked up and we need to get to the root of the issue to fix it. When
Anyway.
you're just blowing up the nukes in Antarctica, one of my favorite things to learn about the all the times they were testing nukes is that when they first blew them up in the atmosphere, they legitimately didn't know if it would cause the end of the world because it would fry the atmosphere.
Yeah,
and they did it, and they're like, well, what if we blow these up, and what if like do we know that it won't just fry everything? And they're like, no, but it probably won't, so let's go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah, so one of the things that, again, this game made me go look up, because again, they used a lot of real history and real, like, you know, science in it, was the fact that they tested all this stuff, and then permanently afterward, there's permanent chlorine in the air in Antarctica that will not go away because of this testing. Like, and permanent, like, radiation, like, movement of weather patterns from the Antarctic Circle because of all this testing still. It's bananas that they even allowed it to happen, or that we just like, yeah, there's chlorine down there now. That's just how we live.
Yep.
Anyway, moving on.
Well, and so this movie, I should say, even though it is kind of dry, it is genuinely pretty frightening at some parts. One thing I love in disaster movies is like scenes where they're like, oh my god, all the fish are migrating away, or all the, like, there's a part in the movie The Core, which is a mostly boring movie, where a bunch of birds fall out of the sky because the magnetic poles are fucked up and the birds don't know what to do. I always love that kind of thing. Like, oh, see, the birds are running away. You know, something much. You know, what are they seeing that we don't? And also, Japan Sinks is surprisingly violent. There's a bit where a woman gets there's a sort of cave in, and a woman has her face just ripped open with glass from a building, and then there's lots of scenes of charred bodies. Way more people burned to death than in the Towering Inferno. And there's even a death counter that tells us at the midway point before the total shit has gone down that 3.6 million people have died. So it's basically an apocalypse movie, not quite world apocalypse, but like a significant, like they do tell us that these earthquakes are big enough that a lot of other Asian countries are going to be messed up. And they also have a little montage of all the things that are happening, and they imply that in this universe the Vietnam War is still happening. So I was imagining the alternate universe where the Vietnam War had to stop because there were giant tidal waves coming and America had to get their machinery out of there before Japan sunk.
Which is basically the plot of The Abyss.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, yeah.
One thing that I just like, along with that, the thing that just really struck me is the fact that no matter how loose, how light the disaster actually is, when Japan, like when they really want to portray destruction, I mean, they don't hold back in terms of how serious it can actually get, no matter how, like, it could be a Kamen Rider episode about a giant bug destroying everything. They're going to show you the human cost of that giant bug running over Tokyo.
Well, I mean, you brought this up, but the lead actor is Kamen Rider.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes.
He is both in and out of the suit and has continued working in the role to almost this day as like the elder Kamen Rider. I thought that was really a fun little effect. He's also in The World Sinks Except Japan as a
nice,
as a sort of cameo joke. And the director of this, Shiro Moritani, didn't do a lot. I was really unfamiliar with him. He was mostly an assistant on Kurosawa movies. But if you go to his IMDb, he has a whole buttload of co-director credits because the studio kept on recycling footage from Japan Sinks. So he has a co-directing character for like War in Space, Godzilla Returns, and The Prophecies of Notre Dame. He never had anything to do with those movies, but they reused his disaster footage because it was that expensive and well done for the time. Do you have anything else about Japan Sinks before we move on?
No, just again, it's extremely dry. It was extremely long, but at the same time, just less as a disaster movie. Like, it's in that kind of hollowed spaces like United 93 in terms of here's a very, straightforward point of fact telling of like the worst thing you can imagine happening to Japan.
Yeah.
And again, it's a thing that happens, that they portray more often than not. And I don't know, I thought it was very much worth it. It's just one of those, it's, again, like I was saying, it's in that same kind of holiday as like Threads or Day After or something like that. It was just like, watch it once and then walk away because it's going to be burned in there permanently.
Yeah, and I can imagine exactly what the Roger Corman version is like. I can imagine they cut out, and that it's probably easier to watch, but a lot less rewarding. But yeah, there's no real good way to watch this one. I had to find us a bootleg. It's the kind of thing that would be nice if there was an English-friendly Blu-ray someday, because it does look really nice. It's a very well shot movie, but so far nothing. So good luck.
Yeah, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Anybody listening from Shout Factory or something.
Yeah. So we're gonna skip ahead because the 80s weren't huge for this kind of thing. The 80s were more big action, not world-ending action. Again, probably because the threat of nuclear annihilation was right around the corner.
Right.
So maybe they didn't quite want to remind us of that. But like you said, there was stuff like Threads and The Day After that were much more dour and bleak than something like Poseidon Adventure. And so then in the 90s, we start to get back into that. Actually, pretty late in the 90s. And so the whole reason we did this is because I wanted to talk about Dante's Peak, because it's my personal favorite natural disaster movie. If we're not counting like kaiju and alien invasion movies. It was one of 2 volcano-themed movies released in 97. The other was Mick Jackson's Volcano, which was released a couple months later, and Dante's Peak lost the critical and box office battle, in part because it was released the same weekend as the Star Wars Special Edition in 97. But I've seen both, and I think this is by far the superior experience. I think that Volcano is a pretty boring movie, and that this is a incredibly derivative and often inadvertently funny movie. So not traditionally good, but it's just got everything I want from a disaster movie, and it's made by talented filmmakers and writers and editors who know how to get to the point really quickly and push us through all the cliches. And I think it's the only movie we're going to cover that's under 2 hours long.
That was a quiet blessing when I saw it was an hour and 47 minutes. Hallelujah.
And it is cut to the bone, man. It is.
Yeah.
They have an entire week or 2 will pass between cuts. There's like one point where like, I'm going to hang out for a while, and then we cut away, and then, okay, everything seems fine. I've been checking it out for 3 weeks. You're like, oh shit, okay, we didn't even get a montage of him hanging out and getting to know the girl, but okay, all right. It was it's directed by Roger Donaldson, who had he was a Peter Weir contemporary in Australia. It's kind of borderline art house Aussie career, and then he came to Hollywood and started making flashy, mostly mediocre movies like Cocktail, Cadillac Man, the Getaway remake with Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger. And then right after Dante's Peak, he made Species, which is like the platonic ideal of a mediocre 90s sci-fi movie. And then he rebranded again and made moderate budget grown-up movies like 13 Days and The World's Fastest Indian and The Bank Job. So, this was like his swan song to his short-lived big budget career. And so I should say the pacing is a lot. It really does throw a lot at you really quickly, but I think it works in its favor.
I mean, it does start off with a bang, where it's just like, hey, there's a volcano that is already going off and kills Pierce Brosnan's woman.
Yeah, and that's a funny kind of cliche that we haven't had to cover yet, is the single hero who there's usually this and Twister and some other ones that are escaping me right now, where you'll have 2 main characters, male and female, who are approaching middle age, which is kind of nice that we had this short period where 40-year-olds where they're either a couple that is broken up and needs to get back together, or they're a new couple because the dude's former girl died in some tragic way. And then there's always something like, again, in Twister, their relationship broke up because of an obsession with chasing tornadoes. In Pierce Brosnan's case, the relationship broke up because a volcanic rock went into his wife's head and killed her.
I will say, like, that part's my favorite cliche of these movies, which is a natural disaster happens and the scientist or whoever who survives swears vengeance on nature.
Yeah.
That's my favorite.
And in this case, the Pierce Brosnan character is a little more run down. He's a little less like, I gotta fix nature. He's a little bit more like he has to be brought back in. He's like an old prize fighter who lost a really awful fight and has to kind of be brought in and find his love of fixing volcanoes again. And another reason I absolutely love this movie is an unexpected one, is that it is a Jaws movie. It is a ripoff of Jaws without a shark. I actually made a list of these once, the Jaws movies minus the shark. So a lot of them were really obvious stuff like Grizzly, which is Jaws with a bear, or The Car, which is Jaws with a car. But you get some more like arbitrary kind of ones like this where it's really is Jaws with a volcano, but because those two concepts are so foreign, you don't really put it together until the third or fourth time you watch the movie, and you're like, wait, isn't this, these are just plot points from Jaws? That there's there's a problem. The expert tells people there's a problem. The town is a small town that says, no, you can't just make people leave because then no one will come back, so we're going to ignore the problem. And then the problem gets much worse and they have to fight the problem, basically. The difference here is that the mayor is a good person who is trying to save the town instead of ruin the town, played by Linda Hamilton.
Yep, and God bless this movie. Like I hadn't seen any parts of this since it was on cable. It was always on cable. Another
Yes.
one of those movies where just like you come on, it plays for 15 minutes, and then you realize, oh, Lethal Weapon's on the other channel. Click.
I think it was Stars. Stars always had this on, if I remember right. Stars or Encore, one of those cheap premium channels that my dad actually got.
Yeah, from my end, I think it was on Showtime or Max. I can't remember which, but it was just a mainstay for a while. And the main thing I ended up remembering is, again, that jaw shot of two people in, a bit of water that ends up being superheated by this volcano, and they just get boiled alive.
Yeah, it's basically, it's a skinny dipping couple that gets boiled alive instead of a skinny dipping couple where one of them gets eaten by a shark. It's like it would be the way the movie opened had it not already opened with Pierce Brosnan's backstory of his wife's tragic death, I suppose. I bet there's a cut somewhere where it opens with the kids getting boiled instead. But yeah, right. It's just Jaws. It's hilarious. It's like, why not? Why not just make Jaws but with a volcano? Like, why complicate the situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you mentioned, because I actually did watch Volcano a lot more, and I don't know why. It's not good.
No, something about it is just really lethargic to me. I don't know what.
Right, like it feels like it should be a Michael Bay joint, but it isn't. And like Tommy Lee Jones is not an action guy.
He's not enjoying himself.
No, this is clearly a paycheck gig.
This one is actually pretty close to scientific fact, where volcano doesn't really make any sense on any level whatsoever. I think that's.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But volcano, yeah, like we were saying, like you said, Tommy Lee Jones is not enjoying himself. Whereas this, you get some prime Pierce Brosnan yelling like footage, like it, to the point where there's actually part where he's screaming at the car to turn over because they're stuck in lava. That was actually used in a Die Hard commercial. There was a Die Hard commercial. There's just a montage of people screaming at cars to start, and one of them was Brosnan, "Come on!" But it's funny because the whole movie kind of plays like an ad for tires and whatever that truck is they're driving, because
speak for yourself, because the ending bit is most of the movie is just okay. It's really fun-ish, action involving people trying to escape a volcano as it's erupting, which we'll also get into my favorite scene after this. But it's all fun and games. It's all boats melting and lava coming up and places covered in ash. But then they get to the end, and it's Pierce Brosnan trapped in a Jeep trying to get this beacon to come on, and it is the most claustrophobic I have ever felt since The Descent.
And it's funny too, because for how well structured and quick the movie is, it really does feel like a second climax. Like they escape the pyroclastic cloud, which is great because it's like something they've set up so much, including the beacon you just said. There's like a whole Chekhov's satellite beacon moment, and they set up all the things that the volcano can do and what stages will mean what. But like the pyroclastic cloud is just like, oh, and by the way, it can melt the world. You just gotta drive, motherfuckers. And it's such a great little climax. But yeah, then they have this whole, I don't know, 10-15 minutes of trying to get him out. Okay, yeah, so the scientific part works, and I live for scenes of scientists fiercely explaining precisely why something happens. I love that kind of stuff. I love I love watching Frankenstein explain how his experiment works in a Hammer horror film where it makes absolutely no sense. He's doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Or like an Italian thriller, a giallo movie where there's a psychiatrist explaining why the killer has to do what he does, and it makes absolutely no sense. I love that kind of stuff. So this movie has quite a bit of that in it, which is helpful, but it doesn't bog it down or anything. But for me, it falls in this sort of category which I like to call frying pan movies, where someone is falling out of the frying pan into the fire, but they just keep doing that.
Right.
So every time you survive one bad situation, you tumble into an even worse one, and it's just over and over and over again. And there's a lot of disaster movies are like this. The Norwegian movie The Wave is a really good example where it does just keep getting worse and worse, but in that case it's a serious enough movie where it feels like they're tightening the noose on the audience, like it's actually really tense. But my favorite is Deep Blue Sea, where just every time someone gets out of a situation, but it turns out the sharks did this now, and then I escaped this, but now we're in the room on the wrong side of the compound and we have to swim without breathing apparatuses, or okay, we've all got together and now Sam Jackson got eaten. It's like, yeah. It's a really good like attached to disaster movie thing. For Dante's Peak is one where okay, we got everybody evacuated. Where are the kids? Oh, the kids went up the mountain to get grandma. Well,
of course they did, right?
And so, well, how we get? Well, the kids took the car. Well, we got to take this other car, this other Jeep Grand Cherokee. It just like, it wasn't a Jeep Grand Cherokee. I don't remember what Ford or whatever it was, but they just keep on. And then like, look, these tires can go in lava. Did you ever see tires that can work in lava? You better buy a Goodyear. But so then they get up the mountain and they get grandma, and then the lava breaks down grandma's house, and then they go down the hill,
and then it breaks down grandma, and then
it breaks down grandma, which is funny because I think maybe you were about to say that before you inhaled cat hair. There's a similar scene in Volcano.
Yes, of the dude who just he just takes a walk in lava, and just the one awesome / horrifying thing in it is this one dude being slowly, like Wicked Witch, melted by lava
while carrying someone to safety.
Right.
And it's like really dramatic music playing, and I think it's a great scene because it's trying to be dramatic and it's kind of funny and horrifying.
Yes, exactly.
It's like everything at once.
On that same note with Dante's Peak, it also has one of my other favorite cliches from these movies, which is, okay, this horrible thing is about to happen. We need everyone to exit the situation calmly and orderly, and this will never happen. What are you even trying to do? The second he says, okay, we're just going to try and evacuate the town, an earthquake happens.
Yeah.
It's immediately.
Maybe my favorite special effect in the whole movie is cars going up this ramp and onto the highway, and it just collapses, and it's a miniature, but it looks so convincing.
Yes.
But yeah, so grandma ends up pushing the boat through the acid water, and then they make the poor one. It's like really why the movie has a PG-13 rating is because grandma's legs are so gross.
Yes.
Like eaten down to the bone, and they're all burned up. I guess Twister got a PG-13 for violent weather, so it probably would have still gotten a PG-13.
Well, somebody catches up Final Destination in Twister, so I mean that's how that one got it.
That's true. I forgot about that. And this one also has the teenagers getting boiled alive. You see their body.
Yeah, that too.
But I think that Bronson's character in this is supposed to make us think of Alan Grant in Jurassic Park, because he's paired with two kids that he doesn't really want to be around, but he becomes like their new stepdad over the period of the movie. It's sort of sweet. Him and you don't get to see what's her name in sweet roles very often because she's always in Terminator movies.
Yeah, Linda Hamilton. Yeah, she looks wonderful in this, and just like they have like this cute little romance going on, and of course they're gonna get together because it's Pierce fucking Brosnan. People just like 1997 Pierce Brosnan is just.
I mean, he's still Bond at the time, and she's not too far off of Terminator 2, which. One fun factoid is that it's starring Hamilton, produced by Gail Ann Hurd, both of who would be Cameron X's. I think Hamilton and James Cameron were still married at the time.
Yep.
So the only thing is that Catherine Bigelow should have directed it, and then it would have been like the trilogy of James Cameron's exes all one film.
And then Pierce Brosnan coming along, just like, "Don't worry, ladies, I'll take care of you,"
and yelling at the car. I mean,
yes.
God. I mean, if you like Mamma Mia, this is like the roots of Mamma Mia. Is him screaming at the car, that David Bowie sing voice of his. We talked about the grandma sacrificing herself. That's actually a trope that goes back to Poseidon Adventure, where Shelley Winters dies after swimming really far to save everybody.
Yeah, there's just kind of one elder that always survives, but has to have the noble death in the movie.
And in this case, it's equal parts horrifying and just silly because it's so weird, like so extreme the way that they're playing it, where they're shouting at her to stop getting in the water, and she's like, "It'll be fine," and then she's just screaming in pain, and the kids are crying, and then she doesn't even take the quickest route out of the water. She like continues waiting for
Right.
us to look extra.
But they could reach for her at any time, and she's like, "Oh, don't worry about me. I'm just gonna,
fine.
I didn't need those legs to begin with. It's fine."
I guess so. I mean, being the one who brought up this movie, and that it's not exactly a movie that had a huge impact on culture. Like I said, it didn't do very well in theaters, and critics did not like it. Wikipedia says has since become a cult film, which I think is probably bullshit. I don't think this is a cult film. I think it's just something that people remember either liking or hating. But it really does have good action, and they use a shaky cam in a way that like kind of reminds you that like at some point the Bourne Identity movies kind of ruin the idea of shaky cam, so you can't tell what's going on. But like they do a really good job just using Dutch angles or just shaking the camera just enough to make it look bad, but you can always tell what's going on. And I spent a lot of the movie going like, wow, I could tell what's going on, but I don't know. It's just
the restraint involved is just, it's jarring to see in 2022.
Yeah. It feels like old.
Right.
And there's also a part in this movie where lava sneaks up on people where they're going to leave grandma's house, and they're like, "What's that noise?" And then a bunch of lava pours out of the window.
Right.
They somehow weren't prepared for it. It also has a really disrespectful use of the Wilhelm scream when the the guy who's Pierce Brosnan's boss, who makes the mistake by making people stay and knows he's made the mistake and then tries very hard to get everybody evacuated, he ends up not making it across a river that's ripped down, like the water's risen and ripped out the bridge, and he doesn't make it. And as his car goes flying into the water and all his friends are crying, they throw in a Wilhelm scream.
Right. Just like, I almost came to like this dude before he got murked, and then they just blow it on that one. Just, that's your Wilhelm.
It's like, what bored asshole in the sound department. It's like, I still hate this guy. I don't think he deserves this character turnaround. I'm going to make him die Wilhelm screaming. But so I don't know. I don't have any other thoughts on this movie. I just think it's perfect encapsulation of 1997. Big budget, but not the biggest budget. Like, it wasn't an event movie.
Right. But again, like, it's a reminder of how, again, this is a relatively big movie about a volcano exploding. Mm-hmm. And by 1997, it just felt so small.
Yep. Because the year before, or I should say, the year before, a little movie called Independence Day came out, which was a mix of sci-fi disaster and the 70s ensemble natural disaster thing. And so stuff like Dante's Peak and Volcano already seemed out of date. So your options were either that this was a Roland Emmerich film. It was either the Roland Emmerich model, or you had Titanic, which was a disaster movie that occurs around a drama, which I don't think anybody else really perfected that ever again.
Oh, I think, many would try and just about everyone would fail.
I mean, I guess Armageddon's kind of trying to do that, but not really. And the worst example is probably Pearl Harbor, where they're trying. that's the worst example of trying very hard to make a new Titanic, and it just does not work for anybody. But so Roland Emmerich kind of became the brand, starting with Independence Day. He is probably more associated with big budget disaster movies than anyone else as a single filmmaker. He made modestly budgeted end of the world movie in Germany called the Noah's Ark Principle in 1984. And he made some medium low budget sci-fi and action, like Stargate was his big hit. And after Stargate, he has Independence Day, followed by the Godzilla remake, The Day After Tomorrow in 2004, the movie 2012 in 2009, Independence Day Resurgence in 2016, and then he had Moonfall most recently.
Oh yeah, my beloved Moonfall,
Which I haven't seen yet, but he also made Midway, which isn't a disaster movie, but is kind of large scale action, and White House Down has the markings of a disaster movie because it's basically about these characters surviving a really difficult event that is out of their control. So, I mean, it's pretty much his career is disaster movies, light disaster movies, Stargate, and then dramas that everybody absolutely hates.
Right. Well, yeah, like right in the middle of there, just to put a note on that, is The Patriot, which I
Yes.
keep forgetting that he made, and it's probably the most successful thing he makes that isn't a sci-fi / disaster movie.
I mean, yeah, your other options are he had a sort of truther Spielberg or Shakespeare movie.
Oh yeah, Anonymous, right?
And then he had a really bad Stonewall movie that sort of erased people of color from the story.
Yep.
He should stick to what he does best, I guess, is the way.
Yeah, I also don't think it's an accident that like The Patriot is again the most successful out of his dramas, and it's one of the few that he didn't write.
Yeah, and also it has Chris Isaac in it, and that man carries that movie like no one's business as just the best villain.
You mean Jason Isaacs, but yes.
Jason Isaac. Chris Isaac is the dude who sings. Jason Isaac, the British actor.
I'm sure Chris Isaacs would have nailed it as well, let's be fair.
I mean, we have seen Chris Isaac in movies, and he definitely does not play mustache twirlers.
No, much different movie, but
but so the one I wanted to cover, because I think it occurs after his peak, is 2012, because basically The Day After Tomorrow comes out. Well, everybody hated Godzilla 98, first of all, and I've actually rewatched it recently, and it is pretty bad. I kept on thinking that I was remembering wrong and that it probably had some value, and it's mostly a bad movie with really unlikable characters.
Yes. Oh.
But then Day After Tomorrow made a lot of money, but was so stupid that it basically, like, it was a case of him trying to make the perfect disaster movie for the Bush Jr. era. And it was directly engaging with politics and allegory, and it's all about climate change. But Emmerich is so embarrassingly out of his depth that it's just a joke, and it's so blatantly unscientific that it probably set the climate change debate back a year or so.
And because did Inconvenient Truth come out the same year as that? No, it came out after.
Yeah, it had to do some damage control.
Right, it's just like
yeah, I mean, it's really, like, I do remember trying to argue with people about global warming and having them say, what, like that dumbass movie? And like, no, not like that dumbass movie. It kind of put him back a bit, and then he tried to like break out, and then he went back and made 2012, which was weird because I remember the trailer for it, which was a really good trailer, but there was like no buzz around it. It was crazy how anonymous the movie 2012 felt like when it came out. I don't even remember it being in theaters. I just remember it eventually being on Blu-ray and then watching it there.
Yeah, exactly. Same here.
But I think it's a movie that's made out of anger. I think it's Emmerich going back to what he's comfortable with. And he's not above this. He had a Roger Ebert lookalike get killed in Godzilla.
Yeah.
So I think that he's distinct. I think this is a movie, him being angry at his critics, and so he's going to destroy the entire planet this time. And he does not give a fuck about scientific accuracy, and his political messaging is the most cynical thing in the world. There's nothing about like conservatives will see the light after a disaster and help us. It's just, nope, the mega rich know the apocalypse is coming, they're keeping it secret from you, and they're going to sneak aboard super yachts and leave you all to die. And it just is full of hateful people. The central family, which is the family thing, is something that's in a lot of these too. But I think that one of the best cases of that is the Spielberg War of the Worlds.
Yes.
For all its weaknesses, that movie does the family running away from a disaster and us focusing on the smallest part of this worldwide event. I think that movie does that really well. Whereas this movie is just these sort of ethically crappy people that don't really care about the world around them, just fumbling from one location to the next.
Yes, but here's what you fail to realize. Did Spielberg have a scene where a limo outruns an earthquake? I think not.
Yeah. I mean, so Spielberg will have a scene where a crappy car is the only car working, and it has to outrun some sort of invisible laser beam thing that's destroying it. And you're like, fuck, Dakota Fanning, a little adorable Dakota Fanning's going to die. Everything in 2012 is like, I guess it sucks if John Cusack's kids die, but I don't know.
Do we really care though? I don't really.
I don't. I'm more concerned with the two old men who are playing in a jazz quartet on the cruise ship out in the middle, that we keep going back to them every once in a while. Like, I don't.
Yeah,
and then like
that's his that's his Titanic nod. I felt like,
or even Poseidon Adventure, one or the other.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing about 2012 is it's every disaster movie.
Yes, like it's him trying to make the ultimate.
There's California is ripped apart by an earthquake, but it's bigger than the one in the movie Earthquake. The volcanoes melt like entire scenery, but they're bigger than the volcano or Dante's Peak volcanoes. There's a cruise liner that gets fucked up that even worse than the cruise liner in the Poseidon Adventure. And there's no asteroids, but there's plenty of giant chunks of volcanic rock to be like Armageddon or Deep Impact. It's just, it's just everything at once.
It's like the Avengers of disasters all coming together as one.
There's even like the flooding. He did the flooding in The Day After, and he does bigger flooding this time.
Right.
But I mean, it's pure spectacle, and it's just billions of people dying, and you don't give a shit. There's no scenes of melancholy for the dead, or a sense that like someone is going to do something to avert a greater disaster. It is just, no, this is the end of the world, and all we can do is run out of LA in a limousine and then fly. Like there's so many scenes of airplanes flying away from volcanic disaster that it actually gets a little boring. He's like,
and that's the whole thing about all this. Like, eventually, just Emmerich gets numbing after a while. Where like Independence Day, there's that beginning build to something just absolutely like world changing, and then it shifts into this other mode where it's at least something different than just cities blowing up one after the other. And just as his career goes on, it's just like he knows his song and he just keeps playing it louder and angrier until you get the point.
Yeah.
And this is the point where like he is at bloody fingers, he has broken his piano, and he's just hammering one note over and over and over, and it just none of it matters.
There's even there's a bit where Donald Glover, or Danny Glover, I should say, plays the other Glover. I keep confusing people. Danny Glover plays the president. There's like a whole other cliche about movies that have a black president are disaster movies. I don't know exactly where that comes from. I
We
know it
had
happened
our hopes,
deep in
and they came true, and then all of a sudden that dream stopped, which says a lot, really.
Yeah, but yeah, it's one of the weird unintended tropes. I don't know where it comes from, but so yeah, Danny Glover has this whole bit where he decides to stay behind and go down with the ship because only so many people can fit on these arcs, and he has this scene where he helps this little girl find her family, and it's like supposed to be like one of the few uplifting kind of scenes in the movie, but like they just like a minute later the entirety of DC is just crushed by a wave, and an actual battleship falls on top of the president.
Right.
And it just really feels like this sort of nihilistic screed, like just Emmerich just freaking out at his line, is like, you fucking like this shit, huh?
Although
Like,
I will say the part that I laughed at and legitimately thought, okay, that's pretty great, is Woody Harrelson just as like this guru on top of a mountain, just waiting for his death, just screaming in his underwear at this earthquake that's about to happen.
yeah,
Just
that's funny because it's in Yellowstone, which does have an earthquake that may go off in our lifetime, but almost certainly will not. And I watched it forgetting that there was this huge scene in Yellowstone, and it just the week before Yellowstone got all fucked up for real. And my dad and his family, my dad, my stepmom, and my half brother go to Yellowstone almost every year, and they had to stop going with the pandemic. And so we were actually planning on going this year. It was going to be our big time back, but then things happened, we couldn't make it, and the place where we were going to stay is the place that ended up underwater.
oh,
And we would have left the week before it happened if timing would have happened, but like I was like, it was like just this moment where I'm like, whoa, I was almost in one of like these movies, because like people are actually trapped there, and like they were having to helicopter in supplies and stuff because the road just got annihilated by the water. That was kind of like as close as I got to, because I mean, I live in Minnesota. We have tornadoes and bad storms, but I've never been in an earthquake. I've driven past what looked like was about to be a tornado one time back out in Colorado, but I've never really experienced a real natural disaster. So it's all academic to me.
yeah, living in Jersey, like we've gotten a bunch of hurricanes, and my mom was in Hurricane Sandy, and her basement has never recovered.
Yeah.
But like that's the most of it, really. Like the closest I really came is War of the Worlds again, because so Spielberg for a little bit was just shooting everything he wanted in Jersey, and
Mhm.
the intersection where the first tripod rises up is in the middle of downtown Newark. It's like 2 blocks away from Penn Station, going to New York's Penn Station, and that intersection gets fucked up in like 30 seconds, and it's just surreal to watch. Just all this stuff that never gets in a movie, and it is being annihilated.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I used to go to San Francisco, so sometimes like that Godzilla remake had some parts where they break some buildings I've seen in San Francisco before. But I've been to Chicago, but a lot of Chicago I don't really recognize. So like the Transformers movies where they destroy Chicago, it's just like it didn't really mean anything to me.
Yeah, the really fun part I remember, the only really fun thing I remember from the Godzilla remake is the night that they had their premiere, because they actually did hold it in Madison Square Garden.
Mhm.
And, apparently when they got to the part where they're like, we're going to have to bomb Madison Square Garden, everybody in the theater, literally, well, in the, arena literally looked around as like, what are they planning to do to us? Just
Oh, are they going to shake our seats at the
just
very
this
least?
brief moment of what did those crazy assholes do?
That reminds me when I saw the Final Fantasy movie Spirits Within, right? Yeah.
Yes.
There's a very I saw it in Tucson in a not very packed audience because nobody saw that movie. And there's a part where they describe the area where something is. It's the Tucson wasteland. So I guess some battle for humanity happened, and Tucson wasteland comes up on the screen, and a whole bunch of the people in the theater went, "Woo!" So back to the. I should say that for how detestable the characters are in this, except for Chitwell Ejiofor, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, he's good. It's just his accent
And he
is
makes
just what?
everybody feel very bad for ditching everybody. Like
Yes.
he does this American accent that's really subtle, but I'm so used to his accent. Like he has a very specific way he speaks that's not exactly a British accent, but is it? And so hearing him not speak in that tone, because I think at a certain point in his career he just decided this is how I speak now in every role, no matter what
Right.
I'm in. I speak with this given accent, where he's trying to do this like the long A's and stuff just sounded weird. It threw me off because I'm just so used to his voice. But his character is pretty likable, and so his dad is one of the guys in the boat, and he's likable. But yeah, I think another thing that makes it really unlikable and kind of old fashioned is that we're supposed to really hate like again, this is another case where there's been a divorce and we're supposed to root for these two people who've been divorced for obviously good reasons to get back together again, and we're supposed to hate the new husband. I guess he's a boyfriend. I don't know if they
Well,
verified
the new husband, who is Tom McCarthy out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, and just like they have the pettiest reasons to make us hate him, where he's just like, he's not a great dad. And as the audience, we're like, you're right, he's not a great dad, but we're supposed to hate him, and it feels really old fashioned to me. Because like the movie Ant-Man, I'm not a huge fan of Ant-Man, but I love the fact that Ant-Man ends with them coming to an agreement where Ant-Man is still in his daughter's life, but that he gets along with his ex-wife's new husband, and
Right.
that they'll have family meals every once in a while. I mean, as someone with two step parents that I love very much and get along with my other parents, I do kind of like the idea that you can have a divorce subplot that ends with the hero not getting back together with his ex. Where in this case, we're just waiting for this dude to die, and then
Oh,
he dies in a
yes.
really sad way. He doesn't even really get a hero moment.
And this is something this oh man, I wish we had watched Moonfall specifically for this, but that's another one where like Michael Pena is the new boyfriend in that, and Michael Pena gets the most noble death in the film, and I think it's the first time where we're actually not supposed to hate him when he dies. Like he is the hero. Like, I suppose that's progress for Emmerich, while everything around him is a regression in every single glorious way.
I'm trying real hard to remember plot points from Independence Day 2 and if there was any good X's in that, but I can't.
Well, I just watched it a couple weeks ago, and not really. Like, Jeff Goldblum's new girlfriend, who is Charlotte Gainsbourg, is his ex, I believe in that, and yeah, they get along relatively well,
All right, that's something.
and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, that I actually didn't hate that movie, but I struggled to remember anything that happened.
It very much feels like a Chinese remake of Independence Day,
Yeah.
for better and for worse. Like, I like it as well. It's just a very different thing than Independence Day was. Oh wait, as a matter of fact, yeah, Brent Spiner's boyfriend. That there you go. Exes who get along.
But doesn't he have like this really crappy death, if I remember right? Like Brent
Yeah, like
Spiner?
his boyfriend gets fridged, which is not great.
Yeah, I just remember, yeah, like that's one of the few things I remember is being like, hey man. The sort of aside on this movie is that it was shot when we were first really getting like the 4K cameras, and that was also a period where I was reviewing a lot of Blu-rays, and there was, I guess there were Aeroflex and Red cameras. I'm not going to pretend I really know this stuff. That looked fine, but there was these things called Panavision Genesis cameras, and they always look like shit. They're always ghosty, and they look like they have too many frames, and they have horrible detail and dark scenes, and they use all those for the people scenes in this movie, and then all the CG shots are these just gorgeous, just giant, highly detailed, beautiful shots.
Because
And then we go
priorities.
back to garbage, and it makes it even more surreal to watch because it's like, yeah, we really don't care about these scenes, by the way, but look at how nice this looks. And this, I don't know, it's movies up there in age. It's more than, it's like
Yeah, it's like
13
15
years
years
old.
old at this point.
And it's still the scenes of like LA crashing in particular really hold up. Those must have destroyed whatever computers they made it on.
Right. On that same note, I mean, like, this really is the point where, like, we're neck deep in a lot of this doesn't have weight just because all of it is CG.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. And also the only good thing happened, like by the third act, when we're introducing the boats, it really is just more stuff happening, and we're not really concerned with the people. Like, there's this whole thing where they decide to open the doors and let more people in, and it's supposed to be like a great moment, but like those are still billionaires.
Right.
There's a couple normal people in there, but those are still billionaires. I feel most bad because I'm pretty sure that when Cusack's characters are trying to sneak aboard the boat and they accidentally mess up the gears, I think that they just flooded the compartment where all the animals were in, because we
Right.
see a really scared giraffe, and I'm like, well, shit, giraffes are tall. What are the other animals underwater? Fuck.
So yeah, the billionaires survive. They all get on this arc, and just there's nobody to empathize with by the end. It's just like a series of things happening.
And they
And
have this thing where like the daughter pees her bed, and so they set that up at the beginning of the movie, and then they never talk about it again until the very last shot in the film. The daughter says she doesn't pee the bed anymore.
right, like, when did
Like
you
this,
sleep during any of this?
it's like, why did you put this weird part, make this poor actress now always going to be the pee girl for the rest of her life? And she just wanted to be in a John Cusack movie.
But yeah, like, this is the point where just, there's no real humanity in a disaster movie from, like, this forward, really.
It
At
it
least not
almost
here.
it almost feels like a pilot for a television series about life on the arcs, but it's this huge 2.5 hour long movie instead. Like, that Snowpiercer series actually worked out pretty well.
From what I still haven't watched that, and I know
I
it's
watched
good.
about a season and a half, and it's not bad.
Hmm.
But it's like, and I think people like that one about the post-apocalyptic boat that I've never seen and I can't remember the name of. But there is well, and I guess the movie Snowpiercer is post-event too. So
True.
there's really more of an interesting story about how life is going to work on these boats, and I could see that being a show. I don't know. I seriously doubt there was any series planned, but I could see that working.
Yeah. Although, I mean, like, there is a point right in of itself in that we do get a lot of media, less about disasters happening and more about what happens after the disaster and what
Mhm.
humanity is going to be like. And I think that's the shift that goes on after all of this, which is, again, less disasters because we've already seen so many disasters, like, on the news. So,
Yeah, it is. I mean, not to get really bleak about it, but there is something about watching 70s and 90s disaster movies and alien invasion movies and stuff where you see news things about uh like, this little thing is going wrong, and it's like in the peripheries of the story, like the news is saying all the birds died and stuff like that.
mhm.
And I'm like, a lot of the news these days is
Looks
those
like
peripheries.
that.
It's like, shit.
And I think we've gotten to a point where, again, even let's go further down the bleak rabbit hole, but, like, I think we've gotten to a point where, like, we've accepted that just, like, shit is gonna go fucky, like, in sooner rather than later. But
Yeah.
we're less scared of that. We're more scared of people.
Yeah.
So
And how they're going to react to it.
yeah, so I think these movies where, we're afraid for what will happen to humanity, like, they stop having the same weight because, again, the people are what we're afraid of. Like, even Moonfall, where, I mean, that does get to ridiculous levels of destruction and weird stuff happening to Earth, which is unhinged from reality. But I mean, at the very least, it's effective more than it is in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, the scariest thing that happens isn't, gravity suddenly not existing. It's there's a family of rednecks that are trying to chase down our heroes in the middle of zero gravity. That's more frightening than anything else that happens.
Well, that's another score for the Spielberg War of the Worlds. There was a time when people thought that whole scenes with Tim Robbins was wasted space, and now it's really forward-looking filmmaking and storytelling.
And yeah, and again, when I saw War of the Worlds, I was living in Jersey, so like this wasn't, there was a mostly black audience. And the second he started talking about we have to protect things for our race or whatever it is, every black person in the audience, like their spider sense went off all at once. We knew what was coming, and like that was the most tense part of the movie. And like every white person around us was like, well, that part didn't really make sense for me. Is that really a thing that's going to happen? Yes, it is. Just watch the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think something like The Walking Dead I find to be very boring, but there's a reason why it was a cultural phenomenon.
Well, still is. Just again, I really wish I had saved the link, but there was a New York Times article that really traced what the most popular TV shows in a given region were. And it was just very telling that, like, for the most part, like, West Coast, East Coast, Northeast, it was Game of Thrones. And, like, everything from the middle to the South was Walking Dead.
Yeah, I mean, like going to Yellowstone, that's when I figured that I couldn't understand why Walking Dead was so popular. And then we would go to the redneck restaurants in Yellowstone that would be full of, you could buy, like, if you can read this, the bitch fell off t-shirts and stuff like that. And then lots of anti-wolf stuff, lots of anti-Obama stuff. And they all had Walking Dead memorabilia. And I finally put it together. I'm like, oh, this is a fantasy of these people. This isn't a horror story. It was so crazy. I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it was just like I wanted to scream it in the middle of this restaurant. Oh, I get it. But the last thing we watched here, which I don't need to talk to as long because it ties into this, but you're saying movies about we've already had the problem and now it's afterwards. Geostorm is the movie all about how we fixed global warming. Now here's how we're going to fuck that up. So if 2012 is the mixed message neoliberal disaster movie, Geostorm is the mixed message objectivist disaster movie.
Yes.
And it makes me wonder why Roland Emmerich and his former partner Dean Devlin, if their split was an ideological one, because this is all about dirty government bureaucrats holding back the rugged individual.
Yeah, it's very kind of like a libertarian movie in the end. It's like all distrust of government, like one man with the knowledge should have been able to go up there and fix everything. Like if Gerard Butler had a suit on, he would be Elon Musk in this movie.
Or I mean, I was going to make an Ayn Rand reference, but I can't remember the name of the character in Atlas Shrugged. But
John Galt.
He's John Galt. He's fucking John Galt, the action hero. He's John Galt, the action hero. The movie even opens with the same scene from Iron Man 2, which is a particularly objectivist superhero movie for most, again, mixed message. It doesn't quite. But it's the same scene where it's Congress telling him, look, you can't do this, and him saying, fuck you, yes I can. Woo! It's really funny if from that standpoint. But I guess the bigger point is you have to have a very distinct ideology to make a political disaster movie, and neither this or 2012 can quite stick with it, because this one ultimately is about how government might be a good thing and it will bring things together. And 2012 is ultimately like, well, maybe the rich people, they did survive and now they can carry on the world.
Right.
Where you got to go the Snowpiercer route, where it's like full anti-capitalist, or the Independence Day route, which is like 100% pro-military route. You gotta go one or the other. You can't be mealy-mouthed about your politics if you're gonna bring them into these.
I mean, Geostorm, in fairness, I mean, there's only one person who wins, and that is Dutch Boy. Like, the extent to which just everything relies on this one project that goes awry is, I think.
But the objectivist thing about it is it doesn't go awry because he designed it poorly. It goes awry because people who are jealous of his success
like petty
sabotage.
governments.
It has to be sabotaged. No, otherwise it was perfect.
But yeah, I mean, you have a point in that just these two have just very different politics, and you can see it play out in the movies that they made together. In that, like, you have characters that just have very different approaches to every disaster, and the second they separate, they just make the movie where like their side is right.
This one's also under 2 hours now that I look at it, so that does help. It does feel a little bit like a throwback in that regard. It's visually trying to look like Michael Bay's Transformers, I think, because I don't feel like Dean Devlin has a style, whereas Emmerich has a style. Even as he's trying to alter his style in these newer movies, they still look like Roland Emmerich movies.
Yeah, and just again, the carry off of it, Moonfall has the same thing where it's just kind of very steel blue and monochromatic for most of it. And this one is all like, sunrises and like, lens flares and, orange and teal.
God, and then it's also kind of retro in that they have the divorce drama, which is totally unnecessary.
Of course.
I feel really bad for the actress, the young girl who's like wise beyond her years, who's just acting her ass off, and the movie doesn't rise to her level of melodrama otherwise, so she seems so out of place in the I mean, it's really, in a lot of ways, it's an espionage movie more than anything, which we haven't really, none of these other movies are really espionage movies, so that is something unique it has as opposed to the other movies we've been talking about.
Well, yes, I mean, it's also doing that whole thing of like, again, like it's just very much distrust of government, in that bureaucracy is going to be what screws everything over. Instead of just focusing on the disaster, which, it changes things up at the very least. But I mean, like, there's a lot going on in terms of just the conspiracy more than it is the disaster at hand.
It's like a Tom Clancy movie at times.
Right.
But you got to respect a movie that tries so hard to cram so many cliches into under 2 hours. It's fun to watch directly after 2012 too, because they're both a dozen different disaster movies, but it's just not as nihilistic about it. It's like they're keep being things like they're going to stop this, and the death toll is high, but it's not catastrophically high, and the ticking clock there's a ticking clock that they have this much time before the geostorm happens, which will be the true end of the world. There's still a chance to do it, whereas 2012, it's like the whole movie is people saying, nah, it's over. There's even a monk who's like, it's done, we're done,
right.
Dunzo. But this one makes more kind of silly movie mistakes where like they take 20 minutes to arrest the bad guy and they let him give his whole speech about why he's the bad guy, but there's like a literal ticking clock counting down to Armageddon. It's like, shut up, just take him in. Move on.
Although I will say, just the ridiculousness of the conspiracy stuff happening while there's, again, a ticking clock for this geostorm about to happen. But my favorite thing is Andy Garcia getting his big hero moment of, like, how did you track me? And he goes, in his greatest moment ever, I'm the goddamn president of the United States.
He also has a great line where he looks, with the hot Secret Service lady does a cool thing, and he looks at the lame brother who has said that they're in a relationship. He just looks at her, and it is like a super cliche line, and he goes, marry her.
Yes.
And Garcia sells.
A lot of this is very much like they got the right cast who at least knows how to dial it down just a little to make it kind of land, or at least be fun about it, but still.
Yeah, they got Zazie Beetz selling a lot of horse shit.
Yeah.
She's making a lot better because she's the one doing it.
Yeah, the last time I saw this, I did not know who she was. So, like, seeing her now is just like, oh, honey, what are you doing?
Yeah. She needed the money.
Yes.
I do. One thing in its favor is they have an international crew on this space station.
Yes.
And that they're stereotypes, but not offensive stereotypes. Like they are culturally these people. Like I guess the British guy, if I was British, I might be a little offended by him. But the problem is that the movie Sunshine already did this and did it
Right.
really well. Like even if I'm I would say Sunshine's a good B plus movie that doesn't get everything right, but the way it does the international crew is just perfect, and I feel like you have to like step it up so much to go to that level. There's one other thing that happens that there's this part in Day After Tomorrow that everybody maligns and laughs at, where the heroes outrun the cold. And I'm
Yes.
wondering if that was Dean Devlin's idea, because it happens in this movie, but there's a reason. It's because the satellite is shooting a laser beam of cold. So he's like, see, there's a reason. Like, it makes zero sense in the case of the other movie. You can't outrun the cold, but if there's a laser beam shooting cold at the
Right.
beach, then you can outrun the cold.
Yeah, even James Bond knows about that.
I mean, it's not a badly made movie. It's the effects are pretty impressive, and the disaster parts are pretty cool. It's very silly.
Yeah, and like you said, like the politics are all over the place. Like you have Ed Harris, just like his justification is something like, I want to change our, what was it? I want to change our country to like a shining city on a hill and not a bank or something like that. And it's just like, that vaguely makes sense, but you've done nothing to back that up.
Yeah, well, yeah, his plan is to cause a geostorm, which we know will end the world. Like, if his plan was to take control of the space station and use it
to ransom, well, it would be a copy of The Rock for one thing, but
right,
also
with Ed Harris. But yeah, yes. I feel like he was like, look, we're taking control of it, and if Afghanistan steps out of line, we'll shoot them with space lasers. That's a plan. But the plan to just destroy the world and pick up the pieces is not particularly well thought out on their part.
No, not at all. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the plot of the event, like the 1998 Avengers.
I mean, yeah, maybe it's like something Dean Devlin's like, we can't do that. It sounds like a supervillain plot, and we're trying to remain grounded here.
Right.
Storm Central. There's also a scene that is the silliest thing where they're communicating through recordings, and there's this very elaborate thing where Gerard Butler tells his brother a story about them going fishing, and it's a story that didn't happen, and the brother figures out that if he changes the timing of the video, yes, that his brother is, and it's like Gerard Butler picked this all up on the fly. He just like timed everything out perfectly so that this rambling story, he made up the story on the spot and timed it out perfectly so it would ramble along, where if you cut out exactly whatever it is, like 30 seconds from each spot, but it's something even more like 32 seconds from each slot, it becomes a coherent message.
And it's just like, well, these two are geniuses apparently.
Yeah Jeez. Another case of Gerard Butler's character just being perfect at everything.
Yeah, meanwhile, like behind the scenes, I think this is the movie where like he showed up and didn't know most of his lines.
I didn't even know that. This is one where I didn't even really look up the behind the scenes facts.
Yeah, like apparently like he was wasted on this movie. Like Brando, like possibly needing cue cards wasted.
Well, I guess I can't blame him. And then he made something called Greenland, which is also on HBO Max and has almost the same poster. It's just the same thing from a different angle.
Yeah, apparently like that one's not bad. I did want to see that.
I didn't have it in me to watch that and Moonfall after all this.
I highly recommend Moonfall. Again, yeah. I don't want to take up too much of the podcast, but like it was perfect. It came out on my birthday. I went in IMAX, and like for so much of it, it is very much the Emmerich playbook of just let's build up these people. They make the Godzilla versus Kong mistake of making the hero a conspiracy theorist, which isn't great, but at least it's a charming conspiracy theorist.
I just rewatched that yesterday, and between that and 2012, I'm curious about the Hollywood idea that you can have conspiracy theorists with podcasts that actually have important information and nobody
Right.
discovers it. And so part of me is like, well, as someone with a podcast that no one listens to, I buy that. But then there's another part of me that knows that like people who own copyrights for music are always running programs to catch YouTube videos using their music and stuff.
Right.
So it's like it's not too hard to run a bunch of programs to just listen to every fucking podcast in the world for keywords.
Right.
And then I start thinking about that too much. But
Yeah.
like
So
I know I'm not supposed to think about that, but
at the very least, Moonfall does justify like the conspiracy thing, like why, because it's Samwell Tarly from Game of Thrones, and like he,
right.
has
I'm
his whole backstory that explains all that. Again, he has good reasons. But the second they finally go to space, like Emmerich's like, all right, you know what, gloves are off, let's fucking go. This movie goes to 11 so fast in
yeah.
a way where the actual like going into the moon is wild enough. Like we're straight up in like journey to the center of the earth stuff of like, oh yeah, the moon's hollow and there's a giant like metal and flesh eating snake in it. Like we're at that level out in space, and then we have Fury Road in zero gravity happening on Earth. It is bananas, but like perfectly modulated bananas where the chaos feels like it has weight. It's stuff we haven't seen before. The
Mhm,
human stuff almost works.
mhm.
Almost. Not entirely, but it almost works. And but again, that's kind of where we are, where the stuff going on with the people is way more impressive than anything else happening, even though this is a movie where the moon almost crashes into the earth and gravity no longer applies.
I guess if from that standpoint, I would also suggest people look into the wave and probably ignore the sequel, which the wave is about a guy who knows that this thing is going to fail and there's going to be a huge flood and no one believes him and then it happens. And then the sequel is the same guy is now disgraced for no apparent reason and no one believes him again, and then there's an earthquake, and then the movie just sort of ends when it feels like it's still going. So I wouldn't really recommend the sequel, but the wave was a pretty good hard R-rated disaster movie. I thought that one was actually pretty intense. It was like I think I saw it the same weekend I saw the really boring Rock One San Andreas that had like
Oh,
one cool shot.
the one other thing I wanted to mention is kind of like the movie that was the antithesis of all of this, which is Melancholia,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
which it hadn't dawned on me until we started doing all these. Just like that's still a disaster movie, but one where the people are one front and center, and two, which is the horror of it is less from the fact that a planet is about to collide into ours, but just the fact that someone is like, "Yep, it's going to happen," and everything here feels so much worse already.
Yeah, the
Just
inevitability is
yeah,
yeah.
that part of it was it's a like on some days like I feel like that's Von Trier's best movie,
Mhm.
especially considering that nobody was abused on that set, which is nice. But
I mean, the idea of disaster movie as a metaphor for depression instead of a metaphor for government inaction or whatever
yeah, like it's
is
just a
very
tack
interesting
that
one.
nobody else takes. And
Mhm.
yeah, just a really unique take. And when they finally get to the destruction scene and everything that we actually see in it, it's just one shot of three people on a hill in a tent watching this planet about to swallow them whole. And it is the most breathtakingly horrifying thing I've seen in recent memory.
Unlike Danny Glover getting a
Yeah.
battleship thrown at him.
Which is magnificent in its own right, but not in a way that's
No. Yeah, that's a good I like that. That's a good that I didn't even think to add that here. I'd kind of forgotten. But yeah, that is the antithesis, but still same thing. Yeah, I mean, and my only closing thoughts I already kind of mentioned, which is just the idea that in these movies they're always talking about there's a cliche where they're always talking about a once in a lifetime weather event, and I feel like we have those every other month now. And I keep thinking about how in the real world things happen slowly, and that in the movie Dante's Peak, they even discuss the metaphor of the frog in boiling water, where
Right.
if you throw a frog into boiling water, it jumps out, but if it just sits in water, heats until it's boiling, it will die.
Well,
And that was just like, oh, that's a silly metaphor. It's overused. And then by the end of watching all these movies, I'm like, fuck, it was actually a really good metaphor for the whole thing.
You know what? If I can close on any one like thought, one of the scientific things, because I do remember reading about that, like after watching that bit of Dante's Peak once, and I remember my chemistry teacher talking about that. And if there's any more perfect and apt metaphor for everything, it's that no, if you were to slowly turn up the temperature on human beings while they're just sitting in a body of water, they wouldn't just boil alive all at once. They would more than likely fall asleep first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
Yep.
I think that's kind of what happened. We're just kind of very chill and relaxed about the entire world changing its everything at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy that this big, silly subgenre is the one that is gonna. Yeah, I mean, again, we were talking about that at the beginning with Japan dealing with its problems in movies like Japan Sinks and Godzilla. So there's something there, but yeah, it's still kind of depressing that the silliest movies are the ones that make us think the hardest.
Isn't that always the way?
Yeah. So that's those are our thoughts on disaster movies, or at least a couple of my favorites, and then a couple new ones that I hadn't seen before. Can you tell the people where you can be found on the internet?
Justin? Yes, I can be found on the internet. Well, on Twitter at Justin of Clark. Again, I do write for Slant Magazine and GameSpot occasionally. It's been weirdly a slow year for games, so like not as often as I would prefer. But at the same time, yeah, that's where I can be found.
Yeah, I'm just replaying Witcher 3 for the third or fourth time because I didn't have the money to buy a new game, and I'm like, I haven't played this in a while.
Yeah, for a while there, I was just like, I had gotten done with Elden Ring, and I was just sort of like, you know what? Let me replay God of War on PC. Why the hell?
Well, here, you can tell me. You'll be good at this. Is Elden Ring going to be too hard for me? I could not do Bloodborne. It was just too difficult, and I had to give up pretty early on. Is Elden Ring that hard?
I will say what I've been saying to people for a few months now, which is Elden Ring is kinder, not easier, but kinder.
All right.
Like there's
maybe if it's on like mega sale.
Like wait until it's like $20 so you don't feel too bad if like you bounce off of it. But I mean, I have a friend who, got into it, like got pretty deep into it, and then like every annoyance was making him have a panic attack. So
yeah.
So again, your mileage may vary, but again, even as me, like the only Soul game I ever beat is because I was being paid to beat it. And this was one where it was like, once I got over the hump, I was like, okay, I think this is actually doable, and stuck with it for 120 hours. So there you go.
Okay. All right. I'll wait for sales.
Yes.
Good advice. I can be reached as usual at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter, Genre Grinder on Twitter, Genre Grinder on Facebook, and genregrinder.com. Thank you for listening, and don't get too sad about natural disasters now that we homed you all out. Which should have been a fun episode.
The end is coming, and have a good night.
Have a good night. Enjoy. Bye.
Why do the stars go on shining? Why do these eyes of mine cry? Don't I know it's the end of the world? It ended